Be Frankie.
Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out. We're stuck in the matrix. Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out. We're stuck in the matrix. Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out. We're stuck in the matrix. Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out. We're stuck in the matrix.
Yo, what's good? It's your boy B-Dell. If you're new to this channel, hit the like button, hit the share button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Today, I'm going to be breaking down the 2027 prophecy of popes, which symbolizes the end of the pontification period of the Vatican popes of Rome. So this is the final persecution of the Roman occupational government that is equated to the end of the world, which is the end of an age, the clay age, that was facilitated by mankind. Because mankind is a kind of a man that was genetically spliced. So you have a synthetic demographic of people running a synthetic system. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, get those notes out, because the information I'm going to show you guys tonight is going to crack your head open, right? We in that time period right now. We in that time where the Black Nobility is going to reveal themselves, right? Because we in the Great Awakening period. And we're at the apex of solar cycle 25 as we transition into the heights of the intrinsic UV radiation light spectrum. So these new energies that's going to be hitting the planet is going to expose the religion, because they just put out a publication that said that Saturn's rings are basically disappearing. So that's basically the crown of Satan. His crown is being knocked off, right? So now we're going to get into the prophecy of popes. Now, what you got to understand is there was a prophecy that was basically extracted by Saint Malachi in the 1500s. And he said that during the time period of the last pope in his last papacy, you're going to have the end of the world. So this is basically correlated to the timeline of eschatology when you're talking about judgment or the abomination of desolation, right? So Saint Malachi wrote the prophecy of popes, and it was found in the Vatican archives in the 1500s, and it was basically written in Latin. So that's when you're going to get the turning point of events when you're talking about the seculum of a cycle that operates on the fourth turning, to where you have an awakening, then you have an unraveling, then you have a crisis. So now the planet is in a state of emergency because it has to go back into the restoration process of, balancement, right? Because when you understand what equilibrium is balance. Balance is actually Ma'at. So this is where you're going to get the global turning point for the great planetary reset. So the prophecy of popes, as I was telling you guys, it was written in Latin. So this is basically all the popes from the 1500s all the way up into the year of 2025. They was talking about there's going to be one pope after Pope Francis that's going to be the personification of Judgment Day. So when you go to St. Paul's Basilica in the auditorium, it's going to show you an amalgamation of all the popes, and it's going to be an open slot. And that open slot is going to be for the next pope. And that pope is basically a so-called black person who was also connected to the Black Nobility, right? So in his prophecy, he was talking about how Pope Francis is going to be the last pope, right? And one thing that I found that was really crazy about this is that when you look at Pope Francis's right here, it says that the devil from the bottomless pit controlled by Satan is the eighth king. So what I did was I did a little bit of gematria. You got to watch this movie right here called Donnie Darko, because it's literally going to take you down the rabbit hole. And Donnie Darko, the rabbit's name was Frank, and he tells Donnie the world will end in 28 days, 6 hours, 42 minutes, and 12 seconds, which is basically 88. 88 is also personification of the silver key and the golden key when I was talking about the Pope on on New Year's Eve when he opened up the keys of papacy to open up the galactic cross to bring you back to the galactic center, to where you get the apex of a golden age in solar cycle 25, where you have the transmission of the sun that basically dematerializes the rings of Saturn, which is also Satan, who is also Chronos, because that means that we're breaking out of the artificial time analysis mechanism. So the 88 is also a representation of 88 keys to 88 miles per hour. And then you have the Trump raid on 8/8/2022. And then Pope Francis recently turned 88, which is basically a signification of the new beginning of the New World Order system in biblical numerology. Francis has been hospitalized from mid-February all the way up until now. So this is also correlated to the numerical spectrum, and you also cannot negate that 2025 is basically the 70th Jubilee year, right? So what you got to understand is that everything is esoterically connected. This is a metaphysical codex that's correlated to this movie, and this movie came out in the 1990s. So then when you look at this character right here, the bunny, his name was Frank. So Frank basically means too much information. So we in the age of Aquarius, which is the age of information. The age of information is the age of truth. So when you speak truth, that basically breaks out of the encryption of the subatomic particles that keeps you encapsulated by Saturn's rings, right? Because Saturn's rings is basically connected to the illusion, because Saturn and the moon is basically the external hard drive of the planet Earth. Now, this is where it gets crazy. Man, remember I was telling you, when you go to St. Paul's Basilica, this is the auditorium, and it shows you an amalgamation of all the popes that took place in the Vatican where they had their papacy. And you can see right here where my cursor is, there's a blank slot right here, right? You can see there's a blank slot. So that means they in St. Malachi's prophecy, he said that Pope Francis is going to be the last pope, the 112th pope. And after that, you're going to have another pope, which is going to be the symbolization of the end of the world or judgment day. And that's when you're going to get the revealing of the Black Nobility, right? So this is what they saying is going to be the next pope. This is going to be the predecessor of Pope Francis. So you got Cardinal Sarah, and then you got Cardinal Turkson. It's going to be one of these two people. So one thing you got to understand about the Black Nobility. See, the white pope is basically the exoteric pope. The esoteric pope are the ones who's behind the scenes. This is when you're talking about the Black Nobility, who was also known as the Black Hand, the hidden hand that controls the artificial time analysis mechanism of the simulation. Because what you got to understand is that you see Pope Francis right here, but this guy right here, Cardinal Turkson, is actually his handler, right? Cardinal Turkson calls for Muslims and Christians to work together. So the globalization of globalism, when you're talking about the New World Order of a one world religion, is actually extracted from this guy. Because this is where the Pope, he gets his edification from him. Because I told you, once you get down the rabbit hole even further, you're going to find out that the European is not actually running the system. It's the Black Nobility behind closed doors who's running this artificial time analysis mechanism. They're the ones who's running the simulation, because they're the ones getting their edification from archons who are known as the Luciferian Anunnaki, right? So they show you all throughout history. I know you guys remember when the Pope, he was kissing the feet of all these people in Africa, right? Because the great majority of the people in Africa are connected to the negative factions of the Black Nobility, right? Because you can see that the great majority of them are Christianized and they wear the color purple, because the color purple is actually a royal color, right? Because it's basically a mixed breed of the blue bloods and those that was connected to the Luciferian factions of the Freemasonic order, right? Or the Satanic order. So you got the Pope kissing the feet of these people, right? Now you got to ask yourself, why is he kissing the feet of these people if he's supposed to be the visor of all religion? The visor of all religions, meaning that you control all forms of monotheistic religion, from Judaism Christianity, Catholicism, Islam. The Pope is in control of all these factions of religion. So why is he kissing the feet of these people? Now I'm going to show you a video. I know you guys remember this video, so that's why it's imperative to understand the timeline of events, because everything, as far as the simulation, everything comes full circle, because the universe is mathematical, and mathematics is correlated to a seculum of a cycle. Everything in a simulation operates in cycles by way of numerology, right? So I'm going to show you this video for a second, because I know you guys remember this video of the Pope kissing the feet of the Black Nobility, right? So now we're going to get straight to it. And if you're new to the channel, get the notes out, share the video, hit the subscribe button. Hold on for a second. Hold on for a second, guys. All right, here we go. Now, I need you to understand something. You know what I'm saying? Everything that's connected to the system is a form of dark psychology by way of indoctrination. So just because you see him kissing the feet of people who look like us don't mean that they actually us. This is why Rod Hayes is basically telling us that there's a diametrical difference between the seeds of Enki and the seeds of Enlil. He's kissing the feet of those who are connected to the seeds of Enlil. The seeds of Enlil, when you break down the etymology of the word Enlil, it means Lord of the Sky. The Lord of the Sky is actually Satan. So Satan, or Yahweh, according to the Tetragrammaton, which means agreeable and disagreeable, that lets you know that he is a part of the negative faction of the Anunnaki when you're talking about the Luciferian Anunnaki. So these beings that he's kissing these feet of, these are basically the predecessors of the Luciferian Anunnaki, right? Because you got to understand, where did the beast, the European, get his edification from? Because when you study microbiology and genealogy, it tells you that the recessive comes from the dominant. The dominant doesn't come from the recessive. So that lets you know that who was here on the planet first. So you have a negative faction that controls the European behind closed doors, right? The European is just basically a front man, right? When I'm not talking about all Europeans, I'm talking about the Canaanite, right? Because the first Canaanites are actually the Colossians, right? And I'm going to show you a transmission in a publication that basically is correlated to everything that I'm basically saying. So if the Pope is the viceroy of all religions, then why is he kissing the feet of these people right here, right? He's supposed to be the spokesperson for the so-called Christ, right? Why is he kissing the feet of these people? That's because these people who is connected to the seeds of Enlil in that bloodline are his handlers, right? And the reason I say I know this to be true is because one thing you got to understand is that the great majority, hold on for a second. The great majority of all the, African tribes and everything, the ones that wasn't basically colonized by way of imperialism, the great majority, of, African people, they're connected to Christianity, right? A lot of them are not hip to the esoteric information, just like how the indigenous Americans are, right? Because like I said, you got the diametrical difference between the seeds of Enki and the seeds of Enlil, right? So now, this is where it gets crazy. Because I was telling you guys that the first Canaanite is actually the Black Canaanites. The Black Canaanites are the blacks that was in the Caucasus. The blacks that was in the Caucasus are the Colossians. They were black people who settled near the Caucasus Mountains, right? So that's how you know that the genetic mutation process by way of extraction and genetic mutation, when you're talking about Yaqub, he is the one who created the black Ab-Khazarian family. The black Ab-Khazarian family are the Khazarian mafia that sits in Ukraine. So this is the Ukrainians, this is their ancestors. The first ancestors, these are black Canaanites that you basically seeing, right? And then you can also see the blackamorphes that's on his head. These are the ones that basically took us out of our sovereign capacity by way of colonization, imperialism, and by way of, you know, the act of parliament, which puts us under their jurisdiction. So you had the black Ab-Khazarians, who are basically your aboriginal Canaanite. So this is where you see the genetic mutation process when you see present day, you know, Canaanites right here, who are basically the personification of Ukrainians or the Khazarian mafia, or anybody that's connected to the Amorite bloodline or the Edomite, right? So the first ones were actually black, right? Which is not a good thing. Because like I said, they look like us, but they're not us, right? Because the great majority of the European Canaanite comes from this bloodline right here, right? The blacks in the Caucasus, the Colossians, they're not the seeds of Enki, they're the seeds of Enlil, right? You got to understand the timeline of events. You got to understand the story in order to decipher what's going on. Because otherwise you're going to get subjugated by the technology of the beast. Because like I said, if these what the Ab-Khazarians look like in present day time, this is how you know that there's a faction of blacks who control them behind the scenes, right? So now, like I said, remember I was telling you guys about Dr. York's publication, Els Holy and Jill, Revelation 17:17, the evil reptilian gave power to the beast. These are present day Canaanites. These are black nobility. Black nobility, who is known as your Colossians or blackamoors, that took us out of sovereign capacity because they gave their edification to the beast. So this is why they ride the goat. When you ride the goat, it means to go out and triangulate. Go out and triangulate means to go out and cause chaos and mischief by way of technology and semantics, right? So this is what you see right here. These are your black Romans. These are your Etruscans. These are your blackamoors that use the religion and gave the edification to the beast. So this is why they used the missionaries when they came over here and colonized the land, right? Because when you go to the G3526 Strong Concordance, the word Christian translates to the word black. The word black is connected to the 1724 Black Christian Codes. And then when you get a Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition, it puts you under the Civil Mortuus principles that's connected to the 14th Amendment. So this is why you shouldn't ask for civil rights. You ask for human rights. The Declaration of Human Rights ties you right back into the Indigenous People Act that is facilitated by a matriarch. Everything that came from these beings right here and gave the edification to the beast is all a patrilineal patriarchal system by way of capitalism and imperialism and colonization, right? They use the religion as a war strategy to take you out of your sovereign capacity, right? So, like I said, this is an old picture of a pope in papacy, but this is his handler behind closed doors, right? They show you by way of neoclassical art. You got to understand the arts in order to understand what's going on. Even when they show you in the Negro coat of arms, they show you that the noble families or the families of nobility were actually so-called blacks, right? And these blacks are the black Canaanites who control everything behind the scenes when you're talking about the black nobility, who was also known as the Black Hand. The Black Hand that controls the infrastructure of of a tyrannical system of a Luciferian system. Luciferianism comes from these people right here. So that's why when you look at the coat of arms in the Vatican, it shows you the face of a Negro, right? And it shows you the keys, the golden key and the silver key, right? So now, this is where we get into the Black nobility. As I was telling you guys before, symbolism is going to be their downfall. Why is that? Because you can see the Black nobility bird right here, right? And they show you in the coat of arms. They show you in the coat of arms through the Knights of Malta. They show you in the coat of arms on the Jason Society, in Society of Jesus. All these secret societies propagate this image. So that's how you know that anybody that's connected to, organized monotheistic religion, if you see a so-called person, if you see a person that's propagating that and it's a person of color, they're actually using it as a catalyst to take you out of your sovereign capacity. Again, like I said, the Black nobility is the noble families who controls the European, right? You can see by way of the arts. Art is not going to lie to you every time because the perception of art imitates reality. And that reality is connected to their history. So if you understand the art, you understand the history. So when you understand both mechanisms, that's when you're able to tie it back to the timeline of eschatology. Because we in the times of revealing, and they're going to reveal themselves by way of the revelation of the Black nobility revealing themselves as you have the fall of religion. So all throughout ancient history, they've been telling you that the great majority of these leaders were actually European. They were European on the surface, but behind the scenes, it was always a Black Canaanite controlling them. These is what you call the Black nobility. So like I said, a lot of people would get this perception that this is a good thing. Oh, it was niggas first and all this other stuff. No. It's not about that. It was actually the European was the face, and the Black nobility behind closed doors are the ones that sold us out to the European, and it's controlling them behind the scenes, behind the surface, while they stay stationed in Switzerland. This is why Switzerland never had a war, because that's the home of the Black nobility and the home of the real CIA. So they show you through the art, right? When you understand the arts, they can't lie to you, right? Like I said, just like you have a white pope, you also have a black pope. Some say that the black pope is actually a European. When you're talking about Pepe Orsini, I think he's the gray pope, but the black pope is actually a Black nobility person who controls the chess piece of the simulation, who is actually the European. The European is just a pawn, but these are the people who's really running the show behind closed doors. Like I said, they show you through the arts. You can't make this up. They show you the European being the front man behind the scenes. This is who's really running the show. And this is actually happening in present day time, because otherwise, why the last pope, right? Why they got this guy being the next pope? And that's actually symbolizing the end of the world, which is a form of judgment day, right? Why is that? Why are they just now coming out? Because like I said, we're at the apex of a seculum of a cycle. This is the fourth turning. So now we're about to have a crisis. So this is why they said that the end of the world is going to be acclimated to the year of 2027, right? Which is basically an 11 year. We're going to get into that as we get through the presentation, because it's going to crack your head open. Like I said, the European behind closed doors has been the Black nobility has been controlling the European behind closed doors the whole time, right? Because like I said, when you study microbiology and genealogy, the Black gene was on the planet first, the negative factions of them. Then they gave their edification to the European. So this is your true Adolf, right? I'm not going to say the actual name, but you already know what time it is. You already know his name. But this is the real one right here, right? Who was controlling him, right? So now you got to understand why they had the understanding on how to build UFOs and spacecrafts, right? That's because they was getting their edification from the Black nobility. right? Because like I said, the Black Nobility are basically connected to the bloodline of the negative faction of the Luciferian Anunnaki, who are also black. That's why you got to read the book, The Ringmakers of Saturn, because it basically demonstrates that the Saturnians were getting off a spaceship on planet Mars, right? I think it was planet Mars or planet Saturn. You got to read that book by Norman Bergman. And he even has a video that basically specifies that he's seeing 7 to 8 foot black people getting off a spaceship on planet Mars. So those beings that he's basically talking about are connected to them, right? The Black Nobility is connected to those Saturnians, the Luciferian Anunnaki that he's seen getting off a spaceship, right? So that's how you know of why that regime in Germany, how was they able to build UFOs with a certain G-force, right? They didn't have that technology during that time period, right? Until the Roswell crash. I think that was in 1928, I believe. So behold, such and such himself, we already know his name. He was actually dark-skinned, black eyes, and swarthy. Swarthy means black, right? Swarthy, black, dark brown, tawny, right? So, as I was telling you guys before, everything that was facilitated by the Black Nobility is all a patriarchal, patrilineal system by way of imperialism. But everything that we did, the seeds of Enki, most Black Indian nations honor matriarchal societies, meaning that the man rules through the woman. It doesn't mean that the woman is above the man. It means that the woman is order and the man is law. So the man is law and the woman is order. So that's equated to a form of balancement. So that's how you have a society that's built on abundance, because everything has to work in synergy, right? The woman's the oil, the man's the machine. So that's how you operate a factory. So everything in itself, as far as, you know, where we came from, was a matriarchal society. Most Black Indian chiefs were women. This is a fact, right? This is where you can see Queen Califia. And then you can see these Black Nobility, these missionaries with the cross right here, coming to the land to take us out of our sovereign capacity with the Christianity, right? Because like I said, the religion was used as a war strategy to take us out the land. You go to the G3526 Strong Concordance, the word Christian translates to the word black. When you call yourself black, it takes you out of your sovereign capacity, because now you're not connected to the Declaration of Human Rights, to where you don't have a nationality or a pedigree. When you go to clauses 1 and 2, it tells you that you have the right to a nationality, right? So because of the religion, you see them bringing a cross right here, right? They bring in a cross, which is a symbolism of war. And they took the Black women out of their sovereign capacity. They took us, this is where the transmutation process from a matriarchal to from a matriarch to a patrilineal system of patriarchy, right? So now we're at the apex of a sun cycle, right? Everything has to go through a reset. When you understand the precessional circle of the equinox, everything started with a sun cycle. Then you had a lunar cycle going from the age of Aries, Taurus, and Pisces. Now we're out of the Piscean age of darkness in the age of Aquarius. Now we're going back into the matriarch. This is why everything is starting to shift, right? This is why everything is going through a reset. We're going back into the matriarchal standard, which means balance, right? So this is why they're talking about, you know, globalism and one world religion. This is why they're telling us about a cybernetic dictatorship with artificial intelligence and transhumanism. This is how, you know, they're trying to create this form of genetical self-preservation, because they know that their genetics doesn't harmonize with the sun. So, like I said, the keys of papacy was the cosmic keys that's connected to all forms of monotheistic religion, because a religion is what put an encryption over humanity. It put an encryption over the brain to where you become left brain dominant, to where you're not operating from a place of right knowledge. Because when you're operating from a place of right knowledge, it basically eradicates the whole perception of organized religion, right? So that's how you know that the religion in itself is a form of Saturnian worship. And this is why when you look at the Eastern Star, it's basically equated to the Baphomet. And then you got the Star of Remphan, which is actually the star of, which is the seal of Solomon, actually, which means fire in the middle when you're talking about the soul of man. The soul of man is connected to the Lamb, and the Lamb are the ones who have the non-ether. So that's how you know that the new world order system, as far as like globalization, is a lunar doctrine, because the new age of Luciferian movements is going to be facilitated by the Fabian society that is also coming from the Black Nobility. So like I said, the Fabian society is going to usher in the one world religion, because the Fabian society is actually connected to the Black Nobility. So the Fabian society is actually the ones that's been running the whole shebang the whole time. So one thing you also got to understand is that religion is a lunar doctrine. So it's not a coincidence that you see is one thing you got to understand about the religion. The religion is a lunar doctrine. So you got 35 moon craters are named after every Jesuit priest or Jesuit pope, right? The same popes of papacy that was in the St. Paul's Basilica, right? Is named after all these popes in the St. Paul's Basilica. They're on the craters of the moon. Not a coincidence, because the fall of religion is the fall of the moon, which is equated to the movie Moonfall. Because like I said, they said in the year 2027 is basically the signification of the so-called end of the world, because that basically symbolizes the end of religion. The end of religion is the end of the lunar doctrines. The end of the lunar doctrine is because we're in the sun cycle now. The sun cycle is by way of the restoration of the matriarch, to where it eradicates the moon, because in the inception of time, it wasn't no moon. We was operating in the sun cycle because the moon is being used as a catalyst to subjugate humanity by way of their emotions. So by way of your emotions, this is why the planet is out of balance. The sun, the frequency of the sun is the only thing that can bring balancement right back to the planet. And balance is equilibrium, which is God. Because God is the highest extension of the multitudes of elements and matter to express itself. And those elements and matters is expressed by way of the consciousness, unity consciousness, that basically reverses the polarity of the subatomic energy that is extracted by way of the moon and Saturn. So like I said, the fall of religion is moonfall. That's what that's basically demonstrating. So this is why when you go to the portal of paradise in the cathedral in St. John's in New York City, it shows you the destruction or the apocalyptic pillars in the procession of prophets. It shows you the desolation process taking place when you look at the sculptures and the arts on the pillars. It shows you the four horsemen, which is basically equated to the four basic elements that basically collaborates with the dodecahedron, which is ether, because ether in itself operates on 0-point energy fields, and it basically destroys the illusion. So it shows you right here the desolation. It shows you all these buildings underwater. It shows you the Brooklyn Bridge being destroyed. So that's why I said the prophecy of popes is acclimated to a form of judgment, and that judgment is going to be taking place in the year of 2027, right? That's because the Pope on New Year's Eve unlocked the keys of papacy, which is the cosmic keys to the galactic center. When you get to the galactic center, that's where desolation is going to take place, because you have a G-force of ether that's actually reversing the polarity of the illusion that was propagated by the moon and Saturn's rings. Because Saturn's rings is what controls the subatomic energy of the moon in the form of an extraction process for reincarnation purposes. Everything that's connected to their system is a lure trap for soul trap mechanisms. They want to trap your soul inside the simulation, but they can no longer do that because, like I said, the keys of papacy has been unlocked, right? The reason it's been unlocked, this is where you go back into the Christ body, which is basically your Zohar or your etheric self. So notice you see the black sun right here in the year of 2027. The year of 2027 is actually the year of Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus is Jesus walking on water. the 13th zodiac wheel, which is also the personification of the black sun, the black dot, the black chakra. The black chakra is actually associated with your pineal gland because the encryption, if I gotta find it, because the encryption is a representation of what took place when the keys of papacy unlocked. So this is a form of resurrection that we're going through. Right? So this is why when you have the fall of religion, this is why the Pope has been meeting at the peace and at the Palace of Peace and Reconciliation in Kazakhstan, because they're going to use globalization as a mechanism for the final destination to save face for their system. And there's a pyramid there. There's a big old pyramid with 200 seats. And the 200 seats is a representation for the fallen angels. Right? So the peace, the Palace of Peace and Reconciliation, it's been there in Kazakhstan since 2019, a non-denominational national spiritual center and event venue. It tells you that the Congress of Leaders of the World in traditional religions, they all meet there. And remember, I told you, at the top, there's 200 seats up here, right? Which is also the personification of your 200 fallen angel. This is where your intergalactic confederation actually meet at to give the edification to the European to control humanity behind closed doors. Now, one thing you got to understand about the year 2027. The year 2027 is actually the year of the sheep and the goat. So this is where you're going to get your great separation. So you're going to have the lamb separating from the goat. So this is the separation from the 9 ether and the 6 ether, right? And one thing you also got to understand is that the Chinese zodiac of the goat holds the 8th position in the Chinese zodiac, a number symbolizing prosperity and comfort. Now, this is also connected to the Pope because, like I said, the Pope, the number 8, remember I said he holds this position. So it says that Pope Francis, devil from the bottomless pit, controlled by Satan, the 8th king. So since he's the 8th king, when you look at the number 88, the number 88 are actually keys. These are the 2 keys of the golden key and the silver key of papacy. So when he unlocked those keys, he unlocked the bottomless pit to where we go back to the galactic center. So that's correlated to the number 8. And number 8 is also a form of karmic retribution, as you have the fall of religion. So it's not a coincidence that the year 2027 holds the 8th position in the Chinese zodiac. Now I'm going to show you a video that's basically going to show you the true process of how they're trying to facilitate this one world religion. I have a few videos. I was talking too much, but like I said, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. So they've been telling us this whole time about the one world religion. Now you got to watch this video. You got to read the captions. I'm going to play it twice if you haven't read it fast or whatever, so you can get, whatever you need out of the video.
La mayor parte de los habitantes del planeta se declaran creyentes. Esto debería provocar un diálogo entre las religiones. No debemos dejar de orar por él y colaborar con quienes piensan distinto.
Confío en Buda.
Creo en Dios.
Creo en Jesucristo.
Creo en Dios, Alá.
Muchos piensan distinto, sienten distinto, buscan a Dios o encuentran a Dios de diversa manera. En esta multitud, en este abanico de religiones, hay una sola certeza que tenemos para todos. Todos somos hijos de Dios.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
Confío en vos para difundir mi petición de este mes, que el diálogo sincero entre hombres y mujeres de diversas religiones conlleve frutos de paz y justicia. Confío en tu oración.
See, ladies and gentlemen, they rolling it out. They rolling out the one world religion because the fall of religion. So this is why they got to collaborate to propagate another form of technology to get you right back into the soul lore system of the religious systems. Because like I said, religion is a soul trap. Religion is a soul trap. And this is how they're going to try to get you. They're going to try to get you again with the religion. Matter of fact, I got another video to show you guys that basically symbolizes on how they're going to use the globalization of religion. Because like I said, they're running out of time. They're running out of time. And this is how you know they're in a form of they're in a state of desperation. They're in a state of desperation because they're going to use somebody who looks like us to acclimate us to the New World Order religion. That's how they're going to do it, right? Because one thing you got to understand about so-called black people, everything that we do now is all based on emotions, to where logic basically takes a back seat. A person would tell you that the sky is green if the color blue hurts their feelings, right? That's because we're not operating from an analytical standpoint no more. Because by way of the emotions, it's connected to the moon. The moon is what controls the religion. So they're going to use somebody who looks like us to propagate the New World Order religion.
The prospect of African cardinals rising to the papacy has captured the imagination of many within and beyond the Catholic Church. Two prominent figures often mentioned in these discussions are Cardinal Robert Sarah of Guinea and Cardinal Peter Turkson of Ghana. Their compelling background.
Like I said, this is not a good thing. These are the Pope's handlers. This is who controls the Pope behind closed doors. Just because he looks like us doesn't mean that, oh, we getting a black Pope. That this is not a good thing, right? Because like I said, the religion, as I showed you before, is what took us out of your sovereign capacity. I showed you on how they were sending missionaries over into the seas by way of maritime law, and they took us out of our sovereign capacity with the religion, right? And I even told you in the last transmission that I pull out talking about the mermaids, because the Crones are basically a genetic bloodline that's connected to the mermaids, your prophetess. Most of your prophetess were killed by missionaries when they came over here by way of colonizations. This is why you don't have a lot of wise women nowadays, right? And they operate from a place of emotion. So this is why the energy of the moon pulls on the woman's emotions, right? She's been spiritually cut off. She's been spiritually cut off by the beings who created the religion, who gave the edification to the beast, right? So like I said, we're in the sun cycle now, so everything is starting to shift. Everything is going back into its original balance.
Their compelling backgrounds, theological depth, and global influence position them as likely successors to Pope influence.
You got the hat of Dagon on. You got this little black being right here. Like I said, that's how you know that the black nobility is controlling everything behind closed doors. It is not the European. The European is actually just the front man. The Canaanite, the black Canaanites, the Khazarians behind closed doors are the ones who's controlling everything that controls the European. That's what you must understand. Everybody who is, got the same pigmentation as you doesn't mean that they, in your favor, right? That's what you got to understand. There are two different factions of so-called blacks on the planet. Just like you have two different factions of Anunnaki, you got two different factions of Pleiadians. You got Ashtar Command, then you got the Pleiadian faction who work with the Majestic 12. Everything that's connected to third density operates by way of polarity. Polarity is the illusion of choice. The illusion of choice is by way of emotions. Everybody on the planet think they got choices. You ain't got no damn choices. There's only one truth on the planet. But because of choices is why you get subjugated by the illusion, right? Like the best way I can explain it, just like I said, you got two different factions of blacks. So this is why a lot of people get caught up into the illusion, because they trying to pick a side. There is no sides to pick. So when you understand colorology, you got a light blue and a dark blue, dark red, hot pink, light pink. When you understand the colors black and white, there's no such thing as light black or dark white. Those are states of existence that can't be manipulated. It just is. And that's what the truth is. Truth is a state of reality that can't be manipulated. So that's why I said you got to follow the path of the middle way, to where you're not subjugated by, colorism, right? Where you're not subjugated by, oh, this is what I'm following, right? That's part of the illusion. And they use it by way of the religion.
Influence position them as likely successors to Pope Francis. Cardinal Robert Sarah, a defender of tradition. Cardinal Sarah is widely respected for his...
So, like I said, we in that time, the Black Nobility is going to reveal themselves. We in that time. And the closer we get to the Great Awakening period, the more and more is going to start coming out, because they got to use somebody who looks like us to galvanize a demographic of people to propagate this New World Order religion. They even show you, like I said, the Chinese zodiac of the year 2027, which is also an 11 year. So an 11 year is basically the personification of a great separation. That's where the apex of the great separation is going to take place in 2027, because 2 + 2 + 7 is 11. 11 is a representation of the two pillars that basically creates the great separation, right? So you got the sign of the Lamb, right? As you can see, the crook and the flail, that the Pope of Papacy, who is being controlled by Dagon, right, which is a reptilian. And then you got the Lamb. The Lamb is a representation of the non-ether. Then you have the goat in the next slide, right, which is a representation of a Luciferian system, right? That's going to be a great separation. When you separate the sheep from the goat, that is your non-ether from 6-ether, right? And it's not in terms of hair follicle. It's in terms of consciousness and energy and frequency. What type of vibration you vibrating at, right? That's how you're going to know. And I think I have another video to show you guys. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. They're going to tell you every time in the news media, they're going to propagate the New World Order religion. They're going to push it every time because their time is running out.
New World Order where democracy and Canadian sovereignty is protected.
Mr. Carney, you're up next.
I'm going to associate myself. I'm going to agree with that. The only amendment I'm going to make is, unfortunately, it won't be a world order. It will be a subset of the world order, because the number of like-minded countries is much smaller with U.S.
Like I said, they're going to tell you every time. They putting it out in the forefront. They rolling it out right in your face, right? You got to see beyond the illusion, right? That's what it means to be conscious. To be conscious and woke is to not be tricked. A lot of y'all going to be tricked because y'all don't understand the diametrical differences between the seeds of Enki and seeds of Enlil. Y'all think everybody who looks like you is for you, right? Spirituality is all about not being tricked. It's not because you meditated and all that. You use that process on how to activate your self-realization tools to where you can activate to your higher self. But do you understand the diametrical differences between good and evil? A lot of people don't have that mental capacity to basically delineate. So when you understand that process, that's when you're going to tap into the apex of enlightenment. Now, I told you, the fall of religion is a representation of moonfall, because the moon is a catalyst of the lunar doctrines that they propagate by way of monotheistic religion. This is why they call it monotheistic. M-O-N is basically a nomenclature title for the moon. Monopoly, M-O-N, money, M-O-N. Everything that's connected to the external stimulation of the world is connected to the energy of the moon by way of people, places, and possessions. So that means that the end of the world is the end of everything that was propagated by third density. So some interpretations of religious texts and historical cycles, particularly those related to the Quran and Torah, suggest that Israel might cease to exist by 2027, while other prophecies point to the year 2027 as a potential time for the end of the world and the return of Christ. The return of Christ is the energy of Ophiuchus. Remember, I was telling you, the year 2027 is an 11 year. The 11 year, when you go through the silver key and the golden key, the sun and the moon, and you go back to the galactic center, which is the home of the black sun, which is Ophiuchus, Christ consciousness, right? That's why the keys of papacy had to be unlocked. That's why, see, look, everything is like linking up, bro. You can't make this up. The number 11 is a representation of what you see my cursor is, the silver key and the golden key. You see the hat of Dagon. The hat of Dagon was an encryption of Baal, which is Moloch. But the Pope, he unlocked it. He had to, because otherwise he'd be breaking universal law. I got to find it. The silver key and the golden key. There we go. See, like I said, I'm going to come over to the side. See, this is the keyhole. This is the upside down cross. When he unlocked it, this is a form of resurrection. That's why in the year 2027, that is going to be your personification of the resurrection of Christ, Christ consciousness, right? Christ consciousness is the activation of the Zohar body or the etheric body by way of the energy that's connected to the etheric network of the black sun that operates on 0-point energy fields. Because when you speak truth, you reset the timeline. When you think about things that's outside of the limitations of third density, you break out of the paradigm, right? So you can't make this up, man. Like I said, Illuminati, I'm on to you. I'm on to you. I'm going to find out your secrets every time. So it tells, like I tell you right here, it says the year 2027 as a potential time from the end of the world or the return of Christ. And that's why in the prophecy of popes, it basically tells you that from 1585 is exactly 400 something plus years to the year of 2027. And that was part of the prophecy of Saint Malachi. And he wrote that prophecy in the 1500s. It was extracted out of the Vatican archives. So it's not a coincidence that when you look at this timeline of eschatology, when you have the unlocking of the seven seals, it talks about in the prophecy of popes, the unlocking of the seven hills. The seven hills are the seven seals. The seven seals are the seven thunders. The seven thunders will be activated when you unlock the scroll of all, which is your seven tablets of destiny. So when you unlock the Christ body, you manipulate the space-time continuum because human consciousness has the ability to manipulate physical matter. So this is where you get the Antichrist is going to be propagated to basically subjugate the energy of the 144,000, who is actually the real messianic figure. So this is where you're going to have an economic collapse, social collapse, civil unrest, and the revealing of the Antichrist, right? And the year of 2027. So this is a timeline of eschatology that is activated by way of the seven bowls of judgment, which is basically your personification of the wrath of the Most High. When you have the 144,000 turned on by way of the Christ consciousness. So it's a mental encryption that has to be unlocked in order to reverse the polarity of everything that's actually taking place on the planet right now. So even when you look at this, right? When you unlock the galactic cross, this is where you get, like I said, the lock and the key of the yoni and the phallus, right? The only way to get right back to the restoration of the matriarch is balance. The yoni and the phallus is a representation of the balance. So it says right here verbatim, that I put. The Vatican holds the keys to the gate of heaven and the gate of earth. The two gates are known as the gate of souls. Golden key, silver key. Those are the two celestial alignments that we actually had that opened up the galactic center. You had the planetary alignment of January 21st and February 28th. Now we're going back into the galactic center because, like I said, the keys of papacy was actually the encryption of Baal, who is Baal, which you see right here where my cursor is, but they was unlocked. Now it's unlocked. Now we're going back to the galactic center to activate the pineal gland. This is where the pond cone in the Vatican botanical gardens is located at. So now we have the master key to get out of the artificial time analysis mechanism because it was subjugated by the skeleton key. So now we're at the gate. We're at the gate out. Now, this is why, this is all correlated to a time of sacrifices or whatever, because like I said, when you look at the skull and bones symbol, it's actually the negative aspect of the crook and the flail, the two kinetic instruments, right? Because those two kinetic instruments holds a kinetic energy. So especially during this time period right now, you got the spring equinox all the way up until May 1st at the Sabbat midpoint. During that verification period, that's where you're going to get an amalgamation of sacrifice that's going to be taking place. Whether it's from a rapper, an entertainer, or whatever, because it's going to be used as a form of energy harvesting to subjugate the energy as we go back into the galactic center. So this is why they got to propagate these rituals, right? So skull and bones is a death code life, and their magic number is 322. That is also equated to March 22nd. From March 22nd all the way up until May 1st is the time of sacrifice, right? That's the midpoint of the Sabbat, which is the Sabbath. So, like I said, symbolism is going to be their downfall. You got to understand the numerology and you got to understand the symbolism. So March 19th marks the day of the dark occult season of sacrifice. It opens a 3-day prelude from March 19th to the 21st. Then official 40-day period of season of sacrifice begins on March 22nd, ending on May 1st. Beltane, the midpoint of spring. During the time period, dark occultists will perform death rituals and rituals involving, watch the large scale of false flag events during this time period and black swan events, and practically happens like clockwork almost every time. Screenshot this at the bottom. I'm not going to say some of these places because, like I said, I ain't trying to get in trouble for it. So, like I said, the skull and bone symbol is actually a symbol of the crook and flail that is also an emulation of the keys of papacy. So this is why the Kemetic instruments that Dr. Malachi Z. York was holding, Freedom Master Teacher, this was his last message. This was his last picture. He knew they was about to get him. This is why he was telling us to go follow the path of Malakut, go back to the middle way, because the middle way is how you get to back to right knowledge and Christ consciousness, right? This was the last symbol, the last metaphysical codex for the chosen, who was actually the Lamb. He was speaking in code, right? And you also can see the number 8 right here, because this is where you break out of the infinity loop of the Saturn Moon matrix. You got to go back into the galactic center. The crook and flail is a representation of Aries and Libra, because Aries was a representation of the beginning points of imperialism and colonization when they brought the moon over into our solar system from planet Jupiter, the Draconian reptilian, when you're talking about the archons. The flail is also a representation, like I said, it represents balance. So you got to go back into the galactic center. The skull and bones is basically a representation of the negative aspects of it. So one thing you got to understand about the skull and bones, I got this off the Yale University library. This is a real secret society, right? So it's not a conspiracy. So like I said, by way of scholarship, I'm going to bring the receipts every time. So the source, manuscripts and archives, Yale University Library. So This is a real thing. And this is supposed to be the skull of Geronimo Pratt. And you see Thor right here. When you look at the title right here on the skull, you can see Thor. Because one thing you got to understand about the skull and bones is basically a sigil or a symbol of Geronimo Apache's. That's his skull. Because Geronimo Apache, he was a military leader and a medicine man. And if you notice, he was connected to the indigenous tribes. And some of these people, they look like they just dark as me and you. That's how you know that the indigenous tribes were actually so-called blacks or indigenous people, right? Here's a good picture right here, right? These are some of the indigenous. Some of them, like I said, might be some $5 Indians in there somewhere. But the great majority of them, you already know what time it is. They look like us. Now, this is important because you got to ask yourself, why are they using his skull? Why do these secret societies use their skull? But also, like I said, now, you got to be very meticulous and critical of so-called blacks who have nonprofit organizations or the ones who propagate organized religion, because they get a tax exemption from a 501c3, which is basically a skull and bones contract. A skull and bones contract is connected to the 501c3 to where you get a tax exemption from the government. So if you speak against the government, you don't get funding from the government. So this is why the great majority of so-called blacks that's connected to the faith-based initiative program, they're actually sellouts. This is all connected to the Boule Society that's being controlled by the European, and the European is being controlled by the Black Nobility. The Black Nobility are the archonic forces who control the simulation by way of the religion. So, like I said, Skull and Bones is a contract that's connected to the 501c3 and the faith-based initiative program. So anybody that you see that looks like us, that has a 501c3, a nonprofit organization, or a church, sellouts, right? These are all sellouts. I don't care. It don't matter if they don't know. Anytime you get funding from the beast, you get funding from the government, you're a sellout because it's connected to the Skull and Bones Society, right? And the reason they use Geronimo Apache's, they use his skull because it tells you right here verbatim that Geronimo's powers, which demonstrated to them on a series of occasions, these powers indicated that Geronimo had supernatural gifts that he can use for good or ill. So they use his skull to extract the kinetic energy by way of that's connected to their secret societies and their religions, right? He demonstrated powers to heal the Apaches, right? So that's why they use his skull. So you also got this. I'm going to do a deep dive on this actually, because this is all connected to the pyramids that go underground. When you're talking about the pyramids of Giza, and they talking about this new anomaly that they found. Because one thing you got to understand is that pyramids contain a kinetic energy, and that kinetic energy, meaning that they have the ability to extract energy from the magnetosphere. So that magnetosphere in itself has an energy that has a G-force that operates on 0-point energy fields, which basically dematerializes the rings of Saturn, because Saturn is what helps propagates the illusion of the plasmic holographic projection that's extracted from the moon. So the pyramids, when they're going to be turned on, it's going to open up the stargates. I'm not going to tell you too much, but I'm going to do a video, a full breakdown of it. And I think I got a couple more videos for you guys for a second. Because like I said, we're in that time period where they want to hit you with so much technology. So I'm going to show you this video. It's going to demonstrate about how they're going to have there's a so-called zombie, form of pestilence that's on the planet right now, right? And the reason that is because the more we get through this process of the Great Awakening period, the more that you have the fall of religion, they're going to use the globalization of the religion to keep you right back into believing it in faith, as we have all these afflictions that's going to be going on.
Is a growing crisis for deer populations across the region. Chronic wasting disease is spreading at an alarming rate, and experts say once it's in a herd, there's really no turning back. Wildlife officials issued these warnings as the disease continues to spread among the deer across our state. The fatal neurological illness has been found in Luzerne and Carbon counties, raising concerns about its impact on hunting. The disease spreads through infected saliva, urine, and carcasses, and officials urge hunters to follow the testing guidelines to try to identify the infected animals.
The zombie deer disease has returned, and experts say it's spreading. While it sounds like something...
Now, one thing you got to understand, this so-called form of pestilence is a neurological disease. Because remember, I was telling you, as we get back to the apex of the galactic center, during the process of solar cycle 25, that's when you activate the God mind. And this form of pestilence is a neurological disease. They want to do everything in their power to subjugate the right knowledge to where you don't activate the Christ consciousness, right? Because one thing you got to understand about Christ consciousness is basically one of those things where it connects you right back to the epigenetic body to where you unlock the Akashic records. Your Akashic records is your scroll of all. That is your tablets of destiny. So this is where you remember things that was basically subjugated by the subconscious mind, to where the subconscious mind gets unlocked to where you tap into that Christ consciousness. God is the highest extension of the mind that uses elements and matter to express itself. When you're able to express yourself mentally, that's when you reset the timeline. So this is why they're going to use things that you're watching in this video to subjugate the Christ consciousness, because they know that it operates by way of the mental faculties.
Out of The Walking Dead, chronic wasting disease is actually very real.
And as Fox 5's Stephanie Bertini shows us, there's concern it could jump to humans.
Tonight, we're looking into how dangerous the zombie deer disease really is. Earlier this week, we reported about an increase in zombie deer disease in several states, including right here in Kansas.
First case of chronic wasting disease has been confirmed here in Georgia. The Georgia Department of Natural Resources says that a deer harvested in Lanier County tested positive for the deadly neurological disease.
A disease found in Minnesota deer has reached the endemic stage in some parts of southeast Minnesota. That means it's likely to stay in the area.
We just see less deer around the area.
Chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is a deadly neurological disease that is rare among Minnesota deer. However, it has been slowly on the rise since 2023. From July 2023 to June 2024, there were more than 60 positive cases, but from July 2024 to present day, there has been more than 90 cases. This is not something new for local hunters.
We've talked to the DNR, and we went to meetings and got more information about it.
According to the DNR, CWD is most commonly found in Fillmore County and Winona County. William McBride has been hunting in Fillmore County for about 50 years, and he says the disease has affected what he does.
Part of the challenge is that with the DNR using sharpshooters and bigger quotas for shooting deer, that our population is going down, so it's a little harder to hunt that way, but we understand why they're doing it, to keep the infection down.
Chronic wasting disease, or CWD, dubbed zombie disease in deer, is spreading according to experts.
It has been spreading, and it's now found in most states.
Begging the question, are humans at risk?
I think that until we see very clear evidence of transmission from animal to a human, we have to state that there does not appear to be a risk, but that can change.
Yellowstone National.
Now, like I said, I told you guys before, one thing you got to understand about Neurolink. Neurolink is connected to your neurological faculties, is a form of a stimmer receiver that controls your neurological capacity. Now, one thing you got to understand about nanotechnology, this psychotronic microscopic nanotechnology has the ability to dematerialize the two frontal lobes of the brain when you get the transmission of the sun hitting the planet. Because like I said, it dematerializes the two frontal lobes, and it puts a strain on the hypothalamus gland, which gives you the propensity to be a so-called zombie in a form of zombification. So when you have the hypothalamus gland out of alignment, that basically is connected to your scroll of all, because what connects your whole endocrine system is the hypothalamus gland, the thymus gland, and the thyroid gland, right? Those are the things that basically keep your scroll of all intact, your chakra system. So if the hypothalamus gland is basically subjugated, what happens is that's when you become an antichrist. Because like I said, by way of the Neurolink is a form of a stemmo receiver, because they use cybernetics to propagate this artificial form of Christ consciousness, because they don't have the genetics to do so. You got to have neuromelanin in order to activate the Christ consciousness, because neuromelanin is the brain and central nervous system melanin that creates a melanocyte, and that melanocyte is an intelligence molecule that creates granulations and prominences, which are basically sun heat genes. So if your genes is not harmonizing with the sun, you can't activate the Christ body. So if you can't activate the Christ body, you can't activate Christ consciousness. So this is why they use a Neurolink as a mechanism to tap into the Christ consciousness on a synthetic version. It's a synthetic version of it, right? So all forms of technology basically locks down DNA. You don't want your DNA locked down during the time period of solar cycle 25. You definitely don't want that, right? Because just like I said, if you got nanotechnology inside you, and when the grid goes down, you're going to go down with the grid, because the grid is what controls technology. It's tether connected to the firmament. So if that firmament cracks open from that solar transmission, and you got stemmo receivers in your head, you got Neuralink, you got all this, technological stuff, all that radiation on your body, you're going to fall when the system falls, right? So zombification can happen by way of the technology if you have it connected to your neurological faculties or anywhere that's inside your body. So that's why it's imperative to get metal extractions. When you're talking about chlorophyll and stuff like that, extract those metals out of your body. It's even in the food, right? And it's gonna basically demonstrate that in this video. So like I said, zombification in itself happens by way of the mind, right? It's not because you got bit or something like that. It's a neurological form of pestilence.
Park recently confirmed a case of CWD after a deer carcass tested positive for the highly contagious and fatal brain disease.
DNR officers recently confirmed a case of chronic wasting disease in deer up north in northern Michigan. That's as the department is reconsidering a ban on deer baiting that's meant to stop the spread of the disease.
New warning for local deer hunters. Chronic wasting disease has been confirmed in LaGrange County. The Indiana DNR says they are focusing on watching the disease spread to keep hunters informed and to help Hoosiers adjust to the presence of this disease in local deer populations. Now, it's not only limited to deer, it also infects mule deer, elk, and moose as well. This disease will give animals a zombie-like appearance, cause behavioral changes and excessive drooling. It's not been shown to infect humans, but the meat from these infected animals could pose a possible risk.
For chronic wasting disease, according to the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, a 20-month-old...
Now, this is also in connection to Leave the World Behind. Remember, they were showing you all the deer. So, like I said, the synchronicities are syncing. The receipts is receiving. So, like I said, you cannot make none of this up, man. They basically showing you the timeline by way of symbolism that they propagate in the media. Share this video, man. People need to see this video. Like I said, everything that I've been telling y'all, especially in the last few videos, is basically lining up. Everything's lining up.
And 8-month-old tested positive for the illness. And chronic wasting disease is a neurological issue that is fatal and can be passed to other deer. There are no reports of any in East Texas.
Kentucky officials are alerting residents after detecting a second case of chronic wasting disease in deer. The Kentucky Department of Agriculture says a dead deer tested positive on October 11th at a deer farm in Breckinridge County. The disease...
Matter of fact, this is on my birthday right here, October 14th, as you can see. Nice synchronicity right there.
This is sometimes called the zombie deer disease and is usually fatal to infected animals. Officials or treatment, scientists think it spreads between animals through contact with fluids of an infected animal. State agriculture officials are monitoring the illness. The Center for Disease Control says there is no strong evidence indicating the illness can infect people.
The Ohio Department of Natural Resources says chronic wasting disease was found in a couple dozen deer killed during the last hunting season. 23 deer taken by hunters in Allen, Hardin, Marion, and Wyandotte counties tested positive for CWD. Those counties were considered disease surveillance areas by the Division of Wildlife. Another deer in Morrow County also tested positive this year, the first for that county. According to the CDC, there is no strong evidence that the disease can be transmitted to humans. Chronic wasting disease first discovered in the wild in Ohio 5 years ago.
It's happened in Pennsylvania, and it's just another area that's going to be affected with it. So unfortunately, the hunters in that area are going to have to adapt to the new regulations and rules and that are going to be set forth for chronic wasting disease.
Some new CWD results are in from the North Dakota Game and Fish Department, and they show just how many deer were impacted by the disease last year. Chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is a fatal disease that can impact deer, moose, and elk. Biologists with the department tested nearly 1,500 animals for it. They say 17 tested positive, 15 were taken by hunters, 2 were confirmed through diagnostic examination. New this year, they say 2 new cases were detected in 2 new units. One is 3B3, which includes portions along the Missouri River. The other is 3B2, that's just west and south of Lake Sakakawea.
New information out tonight from the CDC. They say Kansas deer are testing positive for zombie deer.
It's a deadly disease found in several states across the U.S., and it could also spread to humans. KSNT News reporter Dan Garrett has been talking to experts about this bizarre disease.
It's a disease that's seen in the deer family. They get this abnormal protein. It causes them to, over time, over a year or 2, develop these holes in their brain so they can't feed themselves, and eventually they'll die.
Although there are no confirmed.
See, that same protein that she's actually talking about is connected to the cerebellum cortex that extracts gamma radiation. So if you don't have the ability to extract gamma radiation from the brain to where it causes a form of inversion, that's where you get zombification. That is basically the delineation process from non-ether to 6-ether. Either you're going to be a god by way of the mind, or you're going to be a beast by way of the mind.
Cases in New York State, the Department of Environmental Conservation is alerting people, including asking everyone, not to feed wild deer or moose. Warning, feeding artificially concentrates animals in one location for extended periods of time, increasing the likelihood of diseases to spread.
We're concerned about it transmitting to humans is because it's in the same class of diseases as mad cow.
A human version of mad cow disease is believed to be caused by eating contaminated beef products. Therefore, experts say venison could put humans at risk for chronic wasting disease.
It would likely be transmitted through consumption.
Brooke, the talk around zombie deer disease surfaced earlier this month when a researcher from the University of Minnesota asked for almost $2 million from the Minnesota legislature to study zombie deer disease. He compares it to mad cow disease, which did make its way from cows to humans. But I spoke to national and local experts to find out if this is something you should actually worry about. Chronic wasting disease was discovered in Colorado in the 1970s. Some also refer to it as zombie deer.
Drew Forster owns Farview Farms Meat Company. This outbreak of zombie deer in Kansas concerns him because customers bring in deer that they've killed to get them processed. He says now that more and more cases of the deadly deer disease have been found in Kansas, it's not a matter of if it will affect his business, but when.
And it's kind of inched its way closer this way, it's coming down from the north and in from the west. Eventually we will have the issue here, and that will affect how we process meat.
The problem is, if a deer becomes infected, it could take years before it shows any signs. But there's problems even in trying to prevent humans from eating an infected deer. Ron Kaufman with the Department of Wildlife says that's because zombie deer is hard to spot.
They are usually emaciated, they may be salivating, they may stumble, they may be disoriented, may be weak.
The disease spreads from deer to deer by eating and drinking in the same spots. The CDC says there's no known cases of humans being infected with the disease, so it is not known how it can impact a person. Given how it affects deer, they don't want to find out.
We already have to keep track of the county where the animal comes from, so that we know whether it came from a possible CWD county or not.
So, like I said, we in that time period, ladies and gentlemen. They're going to hit you with so much technology and semantics in order to subjugate this Great Awakening period. Because they know that the Christ energy is here, and they know the Christ energy is here because you having the fall of religion, right? Which is why Saturn's rings is falling, right? The crown of Satan is starting to fall off. Saturn's rings is disappearing. Saturn's rings is what controls the illusion, because I was telling you, Saturn and the moon are the external hard drive, the planet Earth, that controls the demiurge. It's for soul trap mechanisms. Religion is a soul trap, right? And the only way they can do it is by way of the mind. This is why they use the technology to siphon the spirit and the soul of individuals who thrive off external stimulation. Everything's internal. Anytime that you go outside of yourself, you operate from a place to where you're going to be reincarnated again. That's what it's all about. That's why the great majority of all artificial intelligence and Neurolink and stuff, that's basically saving your essence and your DNA and your soul and your spirit like a floppy disk. And they're going to use it to extract it on the dark side of the moon and right back into the hexahedron on top of the cube of Saturn. Because it's not a coincidence they call it a hexahedron, a hex. The prefix of the word hexahedron is a hex, which is basically an encryption, black witchcraft, dark black witchcraft, right? So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, first I'm going to show you guys, you need to get this book right here by Dr. York, Are There Black Devils? Hold on, I'm going to pull it up for you guys here in a second. You got to read this book by Dr. York, because he's going to tell you about the Black Nobility. He's not going to say verbatim, but when you read between the lines, you'll be able to get the clarification and edification that you need in order to delineate who's who and what's what. You got to read this publication right here. And this is one of Dr. York's last publications before they got him. This book reveals almost everything that you need to know about the Black Nobility. And I think, let me see, I don't know, I'm not sure how many pages this manuscript is. Yes, 140 pages. I'm not sure if you can get this off of off Amazon or whatever. It's one of those publications that you got to find a PDF for it, because the great majority of Dr. York's publications, they've been redacted because it contains the true information that he's been speaking about for many different years. So I'm waiting for this picture to airdrop to myself so I can show you guys something else. And like I said, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We got over, about 50 to 60% of the people who is on this channel, I'm saying, they watch the videos, but they not subscribed. Don't be a monitoring spirit. Everything on this page is all about knowledge. So I'm gonna be doing an event. I'm gonna try, I'm gonna try to get Charleston White to talk about some esoteric stuff. This is not my event. I'm being they hired me as a host to speak to Charleston White, and I'm gonna be talking about nationality. I'm gonna be talking about a lot of things that he hasn't talked about. We're going to talk about nationality. I'm going to ask him about the significance of it. And according to this timeline, I know the significance of it, but I want to hear what he got to say, because it's one of those things where you got to mix the medicine with the candy. Sometimes you got to collaborate with people like this in order to get the message out. That's why I said you got to use the matrix in order to get out. So this event is going to be taking place on April 5th in Evansville, Indiana. You can get you screenshot the QR code right here. You screenshot it and you go to Eventbrite and you get your tickets, right? This is going to be an in-person event. If you want to meet me or if you want to meet Charleston White, we're both going to be at the event and we're going to be demonstrating some real knowledge. It's not one of those things where we're going to be propagating the ignorance or whatever. We're not going to be talking about rap and all this other stuff. We're going to be talking about real stuff. We're going to be talking about, the fall of the political system, the fall of religion. I'm going to be talking about that. I'm not worried about, oh, he's talking about somebody's kids and all this other stuff. We're not getting into that. We're not getting into the ignorance and semantics. We're going to be talking about the real information that people need to hear about. This is going to be a serious conversation. This is not for laughs and giggles. So screenshot this, if you will. April 5th, 2025. All right. So I'm going to give a quick rundown real fast before we get out of here. Now, the significance of this video, of this transmission, is to basically demonstrate the reality of how everything that's connected to the timeline of eschatology is connected to the prophecy of popes. And you have the revealing of the Black Nobility, because the fall of religion is the fall of the lunar doctrines. So in the year 2027, they say that you're going to have one more pope, but that last pope is also a representation of Judgment Day, which is the abomination of desolation that's going to be taking place on the planet. So the prophecy of popes was basically controlled and facilitated by Saint Malachi in the 1500s. And he said that about 400 plus years from the year of 1585, that lands all the way to the year 2027 is going to be the end of the world, and that Pope Francis is going to be the last white pope. So this is why he is basically controlled by Satan, who is also known as the eighth king. The eighth king is also esoterically connected to this movie called Donnie Darko. You got to watch this movie. I'll be giving y'all movies and books to read or whatever, so watch this movie. And it's basically going to tell you in the movie that Donnie Darko went down the rabbit hole and he connected with this entity called Frank. He tells Donnie the end of the world will end in 28 days, 6 hours, 42 minutes, 12 seconds, which is basically adds up to 88. And Pope Francis, his age is 88. And 88 is a signification of a new beginning or a new order in biblical numerology. So you got to watch that. And then it shows you in St. Paul's Basilica in the Vatican how there's a open space for the next pope, right? And this is supposed to be the last pope after Pope Francis. And this is where you're going to get the revealing of the Black Nobility. So the people you see behind the scenes, this is Pope Francis's handler, right? And they show you all throughout ancient history who was controlling. This is what you call Black Nobility. This is the beast. This is the Canaanite. This is the Black Canaanite. These are the Black Canaanites, the Blackamoors. These are the Blackamoors who taught the European how to go out and triangulate, riding the goat, cause mischief, cause destruction on the planet. That's what these beings taught them. These are the Blackamoors, and you see he's wearing the red shoes, which represents blood sacrifice. You got this Pope, you got this classical art right here. It's showing you the white Pope in the front, but this is his handler in the background. You can't make this up. They show you all throughout history by art who's been running the scenes behind closed doors. You got two different factions of people on the planet, right? These people have the same names, but this is the real one behind closed doors. This is Black Nobility. This is the European Canaanite who's running the scenes on the surface. Black Nobility, the Black Hand, runs everything behind closed doors. Right? So that's basically the basis of this synopsis. That was pretty much the basis of this synopsis, of this transmission. So it's very imperative to understand what's taking place on the planet right now, because the timeline of eschatology is acclimated to the timeline of monotheistic religion. The fall of religion is the fall of the lunar doctrine. The fall of the lunar doctrine is the fall of the third dimensional reality that's connected to the energy of the moon. So that's why they came out with the movie Moonfall, because when the moon falls, that basically dematerializes everything in our reality, meaning that it has to go through a desolation process. When you activate the 7 hills, that was a part of the prophecy of popes of 2027. It talks about the activation of the 7 hills. The 7 hills are the 7 trumpets. The 7 trumpets are the 7 thunders. The 7 thunders can only be activated when you unlock your scroll of all, which is your 7 chakra system. When your 7 chakra system is unlocked, that's when you unlock the Christ body. The Christ body unlocks Christ consciousness, because human consciousness has the ability to manipulate physical matter. When you have the ability to manipulate physical matter, that's when you unlock the cosmic keys of papacy, and you go all the way back into the galactic center, which is the energy of Ophiuchus, the home of the black sun. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, the fall of religion is one of those things where you got to detach yourself from everything as far as like third density, because your emotions is going to deceive you every time. Your emotions is the reason why people put logic as the common denominator and they put it in the back seat. Like I said, a person would tell you that the color green hurts their feelings. No, a person would tell you the sky is green if the color blue hurts their feelings, right? That's because they not operate from a place of logic. Logic is right knowledge. Left brain thinking is operated by way of emotionalism. So when you activate the Christ consciousness, you activate the corpus callosum, Christ consciousness, by following the path of the middle way. When you follow the path of the middle way, you're not caught up in dualism, because the same shit that makes you happy is eventually going to make you sad. So you got to be content while being in a state of evolution. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching this video. End of transmission.
Ten for